Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a forgotten world of floating gardens and moonlit canals where the water is still. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and wild herbs, and the stars seem to ripple on the surface of an ancient lake. You're gliding over Lake Texcoco, the massive high-altitude body of water that once cradled a city unlike any other Tenochtitlan. A place where the ground was so unreliable, people built gardens that didn't need it. As you lean over the edge of your canoe, the reflections shimmer, then scatter. Something swims beneath. Probably just a fish, or possibly one of the old gods having a midnight dip. You'll be fine. Probably. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you are. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You float slowly across the dark water, the wooden canoe gliding almost soundlessly between the reeds. It's not a wide lake, not like the oceans you've seen, but it stretches enough that on a still night like this, the water seems endless. Every paddle stroke sends ripples that catch the starlight. Your fingers trail over the surface. Cool, silky, somehow ancient. Somewhere behind you, the moon hangs low, fat and orange like a sliced mango peeking through mountain ridges that once guarded this valley. You didn't expect it to be this quiet. The frogs murmur softly in the shallows. An owl calls far off. The rest is silence, except for that soft slosh of water against your boat like a whisper in another language. You're not alone, of course. Somewhere nearby, a fisherman's dugout scrapes through the narrow canals. Another person hums a lullaby you don't know but feel like you've heard in a dream. This was once one of the most populated places in the world, and now you can hear your own breath. It's hard to imagine that this Lake Texcoco was once the central artery of a massive city, Tenochtitlan, home to hundreds of thousands. You'd think a megacity in a swampy basin would smell like wet socks and despair. But the truth is, the Aztecs managed it astonishingly well, with ritual, with rules, with floating farms you could picnic on if you didn't mind the occasional eel nibbling your toes. The night air carries a chill, but also a strange warmth. You imagine a torchlit procession across the water, the distant gleam of golden headdresses, the slap of sandals on damp earth. These people didn't just live in the valley, they engineered it. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs fully understood the geology of their landscape, or if they were just incredibly good at improvising with obsidian and optimism. You steer the canoe past a ghost of a structure, just the dark outline of what used to be a causeway now submerged. These were the roads of Tenochtitlan, wide stone-paved bridges that rose above the water, stretching out like limbs from the capital's center. At their height, they could be raised or lowered with wood and pulleys like ancient drawbridges, convenient until someone dropped your tamale delivery into the lake. Oops. Now imagine arriving here for the first time like the Mexica did in the 14th century. You're exhausted, probably sunburned, trudging through central Mexico with your clan, waiting for a divine sign, a cactus growing from a rock with an eagle perched on it, snake in its beak. Totally normal real estate strategy. Then one day, someone squints across the water and goes, "Hey, is that it?" Sure enough, in the middle of the soggiest marsh you've ever seen, there's the vision. And instead of saying absolutely not, the elders decide this must be the place. You sigh quietly impressed. You would have walked straight past and built on a hill like a normal person. But the Mexica, soon to be the Aztecs, saw opportunity in the mud, and somehow they were right. The canoe slows as it drifts into a canal, the watery veins of the old city. On either side, low-lying plots peek above the surface like earthy rafts. They're not much to look at in the dark, just rows of shadows, but during the day they bloom into strips of greens, reds, and purples. The chinampas, floating gardens they're called. Though, as you'll learn soon, they don't actually float. Yeah, sorry about that spoiler. You run your fingers along the edge of one plot. It's surprisingly firm. Beneath your hand, layers of lake muck, interwoven reeds roots that have been growing here since before Columbus started packing. It smells faintly of basil, and also fish. Here a boat once brought chilies to market. There a priest might have gathered marigolds for a ritual. Further along, a farmer may have hidden from soldiers during the siege of the city. The Chinampas were more than farms, they were sanctuaries, little worlds. Each one tended, loved, fought over, and sometimes forgotten. Quieter now. Your canoe slows again. There's a ripple ahead. A fish. A spirit. Maybe just a night heron out for a snack. You lean back, resting against the smooth curve of the wooden hull. The stars reflect so clearly in the canal you can't tell where the sky ends and the water begins. You blink once, twice. Somewhere nearby, a breeze stirs the reeds. You wonder what it would have been like living here, not just visiting in your dreams. Would you be a gardener, hands deep in the black mud? A priest watching for signs in the lake's surface? A vendor balancing a tray of tamales and cactus fruit on your head as you paddle past someone's duck pond? That last one feels most likely. You do have good balance. As the air grows cooler and the silence deepens, the lake seems to welcome you. Not as a tourist, but as someone returning, like you've been here before in another life. Maybe you built one of these gardens. Maybe you were just the kid who fell into the canal chasing a frog. Either way, you're part of it now. One more shadow moving through the valley of stars. The fireflies come out, just a few blinking gently along the banks like tiny lanterns. You close your eyes, not all the way, just enough to soften the night around you. The chinampas are waiting. The canoe nudges something solid beneath the surface, a soft bump like a half-submerged log, or maybe a curious turtle with bad timing. You don't look down, you just keep drifting because now the water is narrowing. On both sides rise low, marshy edges cloaked in thick grasses and tall reeds. You've left open lake behind, easing into what this valley was before anyone built a city here. A place of mud mosquitoes and a whole lot of guesswork. Long before Tenochtitlan's grand pyramids clawed at the sky, this entire basin was a swampy puzzle. Rainwater from the surrounding mountains would trickle down endlessly into the valley, but fun twist, there was no natural outlet. So the water just sat there. And sat. And sometimes it would throw a tantrum and flood everything for miles. In the dry season, the edges would crust into salty flats. In the rainy season, the wetlands would balloon into a patchwork of lagoons and floating vegetation. Basically, it was the kind of place your ancient ancestors would have politely avoided. But not everyone got the luxury of better options. The earliest settlers here before the Aztecs stared at the soggy terrain and did the unthinkable. They unpacked. You imagine some guy with a woven basket in one hand and a suspicious eel in the other going, "Yep, this'll do." Historians still argue whether those earliest settlers arrived intentionally or were pushed here by stronger neighbors who had dibs on the good real estate like hills that didn't sink under your feet. Either way, here they were, wading into history literally ankle-deep in it. As you drift along the canal, you pass what looks like the skeletal remains of a tree, just a bleached trunk and tangled roots poking from the edge of a plot. It's not dead, it's just resting, like the land itself. Beneath that soft surface lies centuries of layered effort. The people who settled this place weren't just surviving, they were experimenting. Mud water, grass, mud, again, a few sticks more mud. Basically the world's least appetizing lasagna. You feel a mosquito land on your neck. You brush it off lazily. You're in the past now. Remember, it probably carried 4 different types of fever back then, but tonight it just vanishes into the darkness. One of many thousands probably swirling in the thick air. You realize suddenly this place buzzed. The air here was alive. The mosquitoes weren't a nuisance, they were part of the deal. And there were bigger creatures too. Frogs, herons, fish, snakes, maybe the occasional jaguar who took a wrong turn. The ecosystem was a tangled breathing mess. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't orderly, but it was rich. Fertile, it just needed someone stubborn enough to try farming on it. You reach down, let your fingers brush a floating tangle of waterweed. It's slick. Tangled oddly strong. The same kind of vegetation early Mesoamericans would have used to shore up their homes. At first their dwellings were nothing more than reed huts on tufts of higher ground. Think of it like a half-sunken suburban sprawl where each family tried to keep their floors dry and their sandals unmildewed. Of course, floods didn't care about your interior decorating. In especially wet years, homes floated off like confused ducks. People adapted, built platforms, raised their floors, started tying down their houses with logs and rocks. You picture some poor soul waking up in the middle of the lake, his entire hut drifting slowly east. Whoops. And then came the farming experiments. No dry fields here, no plows. Instead, someone started heaping mud onto floating mats of vegetation. A little island here, a little raft there. It worked. Sort of. Plants didn't drown, roots took hold. The floating plots could be anchored with poles to keep them from drifting away like rogue salad bars. These proto-chinampas were more life rafts than farms, but the idea had taken root. One fun little tidbit, some of the earliest Mesoamerican floating plots may have included animal bones layered into the mud, not just for fertilizer, but as offerings. Historians debate this, of course. Some think the bones were accidental. Others suggest they were intentional, hoping to please the lake spirits. Imagine being a spirit and getting yet another bony pigeon tossed into your swamp. Thanks, I guess. Your canoe bumps gently against a low wall of piled mud. Another Chinampa edge. You've reached a curve in the canal where the water slows to almost nothing. This would have been prime territory for farming, enough water to irrigate not so much that your turnips floated away. The air smells different here. Richer, earthier. You breathe in deeply, not dirty, just alive. It's strange realizing that long before the Aztecs, people were already sculpting the land into something usable. Even the word Aztec is a bit of a cheat. They were really the Mexica, just one group among many who tried to make this marsh their home. But the Mexica would be the ones to go big, go organized, go all in on turning chaos into salad. But for now, you float through a world still figuring itself out. A landscape in beta mode, nothing carved in stone, just mud reeds and dreams. Somewhere nearby, a child might be learning how to tie reeds into bundles. A grandmother might be whispering to the water as she plants a tiny seedling in her first floating garden. A man might be wondering if he can move his entire family plot closer to the neighbors without anyone noticing. You smile. Humans haven't changed much. The canoe drifts on. Around you, frogs croak low lullabies. The moon creeps higher. The marshland hums not loudly, but steadily. A rhythm of wet life. You don't see pyramids yet, no glittering temples or wide causeways. That's coming. But this is where it begins, with stubborn people in soggy sandals refusing to give up on a landscape no one else wanted. You reach out and trail your hand through the water again. Something smooth brushes your palm, just a fish maybe, or an old farming god checking in. You don't pull away, not tonight. Your canoe catches a gentle current nudging you forward again through the thick, murmuring water. But now the edges of the canal feel more structured. The wild marshes give way to deliberate lines. Man-made outlines start to emerge from the soft shadows, a sense of planning beneath the chaos. You're floating straight into something grand. Not just survival anymore, but strategy. It's hard to wrap your head around how anyone decided to build an entire city on a lake bed. But the Mexica, those famously late-to-the-party newcomers, did just that. When they arrived in the Valley of Mexico around 1325 CE, the prime spots were taken. Hills occupied, valleys guarded, decent camping sites with natural defenses and room for expansion. Sorry bro, occupied since last migration season. So when the gods sent them that infamous sign, a cactus growing from a rock with an eagle tearing into a snake, the Mexica squinted across the soggy, shimmery surface of Lake Texcoco and went, well, this is going to be interesting. Historians still argue whether the sign was literal or just spiritual PR, something to justify their baffling decision later. Because the Mexica didn't just see a bird and settle. They saw that island half sunk and ringed by swampy water, and decided not only to live there, but to build something permanent. Huge, sacred. The city of Tenochtitlan would rise not from solid ground, but from a bowl of mud pudding. You glide slowly past what would have been one of the early platforms, shallow man-made. A mass of bundled reeds, logs, and packed mud lashed together like the universe's squishiest welcome mat. Not exactly prime real estate, but they made it work. At first there were just huts, family shelters, but then the causeways came. Dikes, aqueducts, whole avenues of water-bound civilization. You blink and almost see it all through the mist, the city shimmering like a mirage. Tenochtitlan wasn't an accident. It was a statement, a flex. Imagine building your empire on a floating foundation just to prove a point. It wasn't just that they could build here, it's that they chose to. And the result, jaw-dropping. At its height, the city held maybe 200,000 people, maybe more. That's roughly the size of Paris at the same time if Paris had canoes instead of carriages. People lived in stone houses, worshipped in towering temples, and traveled by water taxi. Every major district had its own temples, markets, and even schools. And get this, they built the city in a grid. A watery, canoe-navigable grid. Urban planning, baby. Your HOA can't even organize a recycling schedule. The canoe rocks gently as you drift past what used to be the main ceremonial center, now submerged or maybe just hidden under centuries of sediment and half-remembered dreams. You see it in flashes, the twin temples of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, rising side by side, one for rain and fertility, the other for war and sun. Opposites balanced, like yin and yang with extra heart removal. It's tempting to picture the whole place as a peaceful Venice of the New World with elegant canals and festive markets. But don't forget the Mexico weren't known for cuddles. This was a warrior society, the kind where a school field trip might include a human sacrifice and a lecture on honor. And still they carved out a livable, breathable cityscape here on what should have been inhospitable muck. You pass under a low-hanging branch, the leaves brushing your shoulder like an old friend. Maybe it's a remnant of one of the willow trees the Aztecs planted to help stabilize their gardens and roads. Those roots didn't just hold the soil, they held the city together. And the people kept adapting to the floods, the rot, the endless damp that warped wood and swallowed unwashed sandals. One fringe theory suggests the Mexica deliberately chose the island because it was defensible. Surrounded by water, any would-be invaders had to cross narrow causeways and brave, unfamiliar, shifting terrain. Good luck bringing a siege tower across a squishy lake. The city wasn't just beautiful, it was a trap. A shimmering snare hidden in plain sight. A crocodile in full makeup. You shift slightly in the canoe and your eye catches a glint in the water. A stone. A discarded obsidian blade, you don't reach for it. Let the past rest. But you feel it, this was once the city's heart. Beating with drums, drenched in rain and firelight. Alive with thousands of voices echoing through temple courtyards and narrow alleys. And when it rained, oh, it poured. Streets flooded, plots became puddles. But instead of fighting it, the Mexica engineered around it. They widened canals, dug drainage channels, built dikes like the Great Albaradon, massive levees to separate fresh water from salty. You imagine the engineers arguing over that one. Do we use logs or more logs? Yes. Even the aqueducts were built on the lake bed. Twin pipes bringing in clean water from Chapultepec, carried on raised platforms of stone and wood. All while the marsh gurgled beneath them, trying to pull everything down. There's something almost magical about the balance they achieved. High-tech for their time, but still grounded in mud and myth. Rituals weren't separate from infrastructure. You might bless your canoe before launching it. Offer maize to the water gods before planting. Whisper apologies into the canal if a harvest failed. The city ran on labor, faith, and enough corn to fill every modern tortilla chip bag for the next decade. As you float through this watery grid, you feel both awe and disbelief. Tenochtitlan wasn't supposed to work. It defied logic, gravity, even common sense. But it stood for nearly 2 centuries as one of the most advanced urban centers in the world. Your eyes drift upward. The stars shimmer in the water again. Somewhere Huitzilopochtli watches. Or maybe he's just laughing. You're floating through a memory after all. A city that lived, breathed, then sank slowly, not in disaster, but in layers of silt and silence. One last corner, one final ripple of the water. Your canoe slides between 2 old garden plots, narrow and forgotten. The edges are crumbling, but the spirit remains. A trace of the hands that built this city. One basket of mud at a time, Dot. Your paddle dips silently into the canal, the water sighing as it parts. You're deeper in now, past the outlines of where temples once loomed and markets bustled. The city is behind you, or rather beneath you, and ahead lies something quieter but no less remarkable. A stretch of patchwork islands stitched into the lake itself, like someone had scattered a quilt made of vegetables and dreams across the water. You're entering Chinampa country, and it all started so simply. Picture a tired farmer ankle-deep in water, realizing that the lake's shallows could be persuaded to grow food if he just piled enough mud on top of the vegetation. Mud from the lake bottom was nutrient-rich, practically a smoothie for plants. Add some reeds, maybe a few logs, maybe some duck droppings for flair, and boom, instant island. Well, almost. The real magic of Chinampas wasn't that they floated. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Not really. Historians still argue whether the very earliest Chinampas were raft-like and movable, but the classic form was anchored in place, permanent-rooted, and astonishingly productive. More of a lake-bed garden on life support than a floaty farm. But floating gardens has a nice ring to it, so the nickname stuck like wet clay on a sandal. As your boat noses past one long rectangular strip, you get a closer look. A single Chinampa isn't wide, maybe 10 to 30 feet, but it stretches long, sometimes over 300 feet, like a green spine rising just barely above the water. Each one is ringed by a narrow canal, like the veins between leaves, and separated from its neighbor by a footpath or water lane. You could walk the edge barefoot and muddy, or paddle your way through in a canoe loaded with chilies and gossip. The construction was equal parts brute labor and botanical wizardry. First, they drove long wooden stakes, often willow branches, into the lake bed to form a rectangle. Then came the layering. Muck from the bottom, aquatic vegetation, more muck, more reeds. You could say they invented composting before it was cool. Every layer sank a little, compressed by the weight. But that was part of the plan. Over time, these layers hardened just enough to walk on without getting sucked in by the swampy earth beneath. And those willow stakes, they weren't just there to mark the corners. They grew, literally. Willows took root and became living anchors, holding the chinampas in place with a tangle of roots that hugged the island from underneath like a mother holding a muddy child. And their shade ideal for certain herbs that didn't want full sun. Practical and poetic. You reach out and trail your fingers along the edge of one. It's soft but firm, spongy almost, like stepping on a cake that was left out in the rain but somehow still managed to grow tomatoes. The soil is dark rich, almost black, a kind of loamy perfection born from centuries of careful tending. Farmers return to their chinampas year after year, adding more lake mud, more decomposed vegetation, creating a nutrient cycle that never really ended. A self-renewing buffet for squash beans, amaranth tomatoes, and maize. And oh, the maize! Corn ruled this watery empire. It grew tall and strong on the chinampas, its roots unbothered by the soggy base because the soil was just right. You can almost hear the stalks rustling in the night breeze like a whispered lullaby sung by the earth itself. One fringe belief suggests that each chinampa was seen as a living entity, a kind of spirit-possessed patch of earth. Farmers would talk to their plots not metaphorically, but like old friends. A scolding here, a compliment there. Grow well or I'll feed you to the ducks. Probably wasn't unheard of. But then again, who are we to question ancient motivational tactics? You drift further in. The canal narrows the chinampas more frequent now. They stretch into the darkness like rows of books on a shelf, and each one has its own story. Some are abandoned, just tangled weeds and a few defiant marigolds. Others burst with color even in the moonlight. You spot a flash of red chili peppers, a splash of yellow marigolds again grown for altars and rituals. Aztec farmers didn't just plant for food, they planted for ceremony too. In fact, the Chinampa wasn't just a farm, it was a temple in disguise. Every planting had its ritual, the solstice time for beans, a coming-of-age ceremony. Don't forget the ceremonial squash. One might even say the Chinampa calendar was more precise than your smartwatch's weather app. And more flavorful. You pause near a small outcropping, just a stone platform poking above the water, surrounded by whispering cornstalks. This might have been a resting place for a farmer or perhaps an altar, a place to leave offerings to the gods of water, earth, and sun. A few polished stones still sit in the center, worn smooth by time and possibly fingers. You feel the weight of time here, not heavy but humming. Centuries of hands planting seeds, patting soil, harvesting by moonlight. Generations folding themselves into the mud and becoming part of the cycle. Each Chinampa a family's legacy, a quiet defiance of water's will. And yet, it wasn't all mud pies and melons. Chinampa life was hard. The water carried disease, insects thrived, roots had to be watched constantly to ensure they didn't rot. Overplant and the soil tired, underplant and weeds took over, there were no breaks, no seasons off. These plots demanded attention year-round, like a very needy houseplant that could drown you. Still, the rewards were unmatched. Chinampas could produce up to 7 harvests a year. 7! That's not just efficient, that's absurd. In a time when famines haunted empires, the Mexica turned their wetlands into food factories. The floating gardens fed not just the city, but the armies, the nobles, the priests. If Tenochtitlan was a beating heart, the Chinampas were the lungs pulling in water-breath life. And they were quiet, peaceful. Not like your average battlefield or bustling bazaar. Even now, as you float among them, you feel the difference. This is a space that was grown, not built, cultivated, not conquered. You lie back in the canoe watching the stars through the gaps in the willows. The Chinampas rest beneath you, soft and still but full of memory. You imagine them humming low and deep, a melody of mud and maize. And slowly, gently, you drift on dot. The water curls softly against your canoe as it drifts past another Chinampa. This one is older than your great-great-grandparents' regrets. Its edges sag just slightly like it's exhaling after hundreds of years of service. The willows here are taller, thicker, their branches arching above you in loose green braids that filter the moonlight. You glide beneath them and feel the brush of something ancient and living roots above roots below. These trees weren't planted for decoration. They were the scaffolding of the entire system, the very bones of the Chinampa structure. Willow roots tangled through the mud and muck holding the plots together, preventing the carefully layered soil from slipping away into the water. Picture it a floating garden with a built-in root cage tree tendrils that grabbed the land and didn't let go. It's like someone invented biodegradable rebar before the Romans even got their aqueducts sorted. And the trees weren't picky. Willow, cypress, and aoehote, each chosen for its ability to survive wet feet. Ahoejote in particular became the Chinampa superstar. It didn't just grow in water, it thrived in it. Fast-growing, deeply rooted, flexible, like the yogi of swamp trees. And it could be coppiced, meaning farmers could regularly prune its branches for use without killing the tree. More wood, more fuel, more shade, and still it lived on whispering over the canals like a guardian. You drift past a row of these gentle giants now, and it feels like passing through a living colonnade. The leaves rustle above you, a light wind, or maybe just the trees saying, "We remember." You stop paddling. The canoe rocks once, twice, and settles. You're at the edge of a chinampa that's perfectly preserved, long, rectangular. Its edges lined with brushwood barriers. These were the original retaining walls, woven mats of sticks and reeds packed against the mud to keep it from collapsing into the canal. It's not glamorous, it's not stone masonry, but it works. Hundreds of years later, you're still floating next to it. You press your palm to the edge. Damp, firm, still breathing. The reeds have broken down into something soft like peat. The roots have knitted together into one continuous net of organic memory. And tucked inside this loamy cradle, vegetables, flowers, herbs, life. Historians still argue whether Chinampa construction was taught systematically like a village-wide tutorial, or if it evolved through messy local trial and error. Either way, it became an art. A family might have several Chinampas passed down like heirlooms each, with its own soil personality and microclimate. This one's better for maize, that one for herbs. And yes, that one's where your cousin accidentally planted 3 different kinds of poisonous nightshade. Whoops. It wasn't just the structure that made these gardens so effective, it was the constant maintenance. Farmers paddled out daily, no matter the weather, to dredge the lake bottom for fresh mud which they'd then haul up and spread across the surface of each plot. It kept the soil nutrient-rich and fluffy, the plant roots well-fed and aerated. If you've ever had to turn compost by hand, imagine doing it knee-deep in muck with nothing but a canoe and a stick, year-round. And they didn't just feed the plants, they tended the trees, too. Willow roots were watched and encouraged. If they grew too aggressively and pierced the wrong plot, they'd be redirected. If they died, they had to be replaced fast or risk a collapse. It was less like farming, more like raising a cranky, damp baby that occasionally grew chilies. Still, the system was elegant. Every part of it had a purpose. The canals between Chinampas weren't just roads, they were irrigation lines. Overflow water would seep gently into the plots, but not flood them. Too dry, just dredge a little and pour. Too wet, add another layer of soil. The balance was delicate, and the Aztecs managed it with bare hands and stubborn patience. You spot a frog on the edge of the bank, silent, golden-eyed, watching you as if it's been sitting there for centuries, witnessing every crop rotation, every tree planted, every whispered prayer to Tlaloc. In a way, it has. Frogs thrived in the Chinampa zone. They kept bugs down, provided a soundtrack, occasionally got eaten. The wheel turns. And there were other helpers too. Ducks, egrets, tiny fish that fed on algae and laid eggs in the calmer shallows between plots. Farmers used these creatures not just for food, but as ecological workers. A duck wasn't just a snack, it was a fertilizer factory. Its droppings were gold. Tossed into the mud, they added nitrogen. And fish guts even better. Crunchy, squishy miracle grow. You lean back, letting your hand trail through the water. The moon's reflection breaks and reforms like silver skin shifting over liquid muscle. You feel the pull of the lake, not strong, not dangerous, just insistent, like it wants you to understand something. These gardens weren't just human creations, they were negotiations. Between the lake and the people, between the mud and the sun, between hunger and hope. One theory even suggests that certain willows were chosen not just for their root strength, but their sacred properties. Trees weren't just structural, they were spiritual. A tree growing at the corner of your chinampa might be blessed whispered to even offered gifts. A handful of maize, a flower, a drop of blood from a pin-pricked finger. Old traditions muddy and quiet. The canoe drifts again, rounding a bend between two narrow plots. You see the network more clearly now, a living latticework of earth and water trees and crops, paddles and prayers. It's not industrial, it's not standardized. But it works. It still works. Parts of it anyway. Long after the empire collapsed, long after the gods fell silent, the trees kept growing, the roots kept holding, and the soil remembered. As you pass under another willow branch, a leaf brushes your forehead. You imagine a farmer brushing the same way through low branches centuries ago, checking his chilies, muttering about pests. You wonder if he thought it would last, or if he just hoped it would last long enough. And still the chinampa floats. Not on the water, but in memory, in the rhythm of roots beneath your canoe. In the trees that hold the soil like old secrets. You close your eyes. Just for a moment, dot. The canoe rocks gently nudged by a lazy ripple that rolls in from deeper waters. You stretch a little, shift your weight, and peer across the narrow channel to another garden plot. This one unusually tidy, its rows of plants perfectly aligned under the moonlight, like an obsessive-compulsive god had taken up landscaping. It's beautiful, sure, but there's something funny about it. From here, it looks like it's floating. And that's the great Chinampa myth, isn't it, floating gardens? Even the name feels like a trick. Like some ancient PR campaign slapped a catchy slogan on a miracle of mud and engineering. The idea that these were rafts drifting peacefully across the lake. Not quite. The truth is both less magical and more impressive. Because the Chinampas didn't float. Not like boats or lily pads. They were anchored fixed into place with poles and roots and layers of sediment so dense they became part of the lake itself. You couldn't just push one away with your paddle like a forgotten pool toy. But the illusion of floating. That was real, especially when the morning mist rolled in and the water stilled. In the right light, the gardens looked like they hovered just above the lake, untethered and dreamlike. You blinked and swore you saw them drift. But they didn't. You pass close to one now. From a distance, it looked like a raft. Up close, it's a rectangle of living soil, sodden but solid, with thick reeds edging its border like the decorative trim on a swampy quilt. You knock your paddle gently against the edge. It thuds. That's not a raft. That's a sunken foundation built to last. Historians still debate how many of the earliest chinampas might have actually floated true rafts, lashed together with wood and vegetation, free to be towed around by canoe-like aquatic food carts. There are old colonial accounts that mention movable plots in the shallows, especially among smaller farming communities on the fringes of Tenochtitlán. Some fringe scholars argue these mobile chinampas were prototypes used to experiment before the builders committed to permanent rooted platforms. But no evidence remains. Just watery legends. You imagine what that would have looked like, little salad barges drifting around bumping into one another. Farmers shouting, "Hey, you're on my tomatoes," as the wind shoved a raft of squash into someone's canal-side hut. Romantic, sure. Practical, eh? What's more impressive is what they actually did: create hundreds of immobile islands on a foundation no one in their right mind would have called land. They weren't cheating gravity, they were negotiating with it. Every chinampa was a layered construction woven reed mats, staked down into the marshy bottom, then built up with lake mud composted vegetation, animal droppings, and sometimes even the occasional ceremonial item buried for luck. And the result? A plot of land that might look like it floats, but is as grounded as your least adventurous uncle. You drift past another older plot, this one half collapsed on one side like the lake is slowly taking it back. The reeds have overgrown the soil, slumped into the water. A heron stands in the shallows nearby, tall and silent, a feathered sentinel over yesterday's harvest. Even here in decay, the chinampa has grace. It doesn't sink so much as surrender, folding itself into the water like an old blanket. You think about the irony: the Aztecs lived in a city surrounded by water, but they created their farmland. The lake didn't offer up dry fields, it offered muck, and the Mexica took that muck and turned it into breakfast lunch and enough maize to feed armies. It's hard to overstate the scale. The Chinampa system covered thousands of acres, especially in places like Xochimilco and Tlahuac, grid after grid of long, thin islands connected by narrow canals. From above, it must have looked like a checkerboard woven by a god with too much time on their hands. And it worked. The soil was moist, fertile, easy to weed. You didn't need irrigation systems because you were already on top of your water source. Floods. Manageable. Just raise the walls, dredge the canals, add another layer of dirt. No rain. The lake would rise and seep through the roots anyway. You start to see why the floating part stuck in people's minds. There's a kind of grace to it. Something about being neither fully land nor fully water. A system suspended between states, like dreaming with your eyes open. Of course, not everyone was a fan. The Spanish, when they arrived, found the chinampas suspicious. Too neat, too organized, too un-European. They described them as floating fields because they couldn't wrap their heads around how anyone managed to farm in a swamp without draining it. You can practically hear Cortez squinting from his saddle, wondering if the land would sink under his horse's hooves. Joke's on him. The land held. The horses, however, hated it. Horses. And here's a quirky little detail for you. Chinampas weren't just practical, they were categorized. Some were for maize, others for vegetables. Certain plots were dedicated solely to flowers like marigolds and dahlias, which were used in rituals, garlands, and market displays. Flower chinampas were often kept near temples where priests would pick the freshest blooms to honor the gods, or to decorate altars before a ceremony that may or may not involve heart removal. PG-13, remember. You pass one now half wild, its borders trimmed in low reeds, but its center overflowing with flowering plants that seem to glow in the moonlight. The air is different here. Sweet, fragrant, like the scent of a temple's back garden or a basket of blossoms carried to market by a sleepy vendor at sunrise. And yes, this illusion of floating, it still gets you. Even now, as you know the truth, your brain wants to believe these plots are suspended in midair. The reflection of stars on the water below just adds to the trick. It's not your fault. The Aztecs designed this world to fool you a little. To blur the lines between land and lake, between work and ritual, between life and whatever comes after. You lean back, hands behind your head, the canoe rocking gently beneath you. Somewhere a dog barks soft and distant. A farmer may be getting ready for the morning. Maybe someone still planting flowers, still layering mud, still listening to the hush of the reeds as they wave like sleepy hands in the dark. The chinampas didn't float, but they thrived. And that might be even more magical, Dot. The sky begins to shift. Not sunrise yet, but the kind of dusky blue that hints at it, a velvet sky peeling back toward the day. You drift through a quiet canal, the gardens sleeping on either side of you, tucked beneath their tangled willow limbs and dew-slick crops. But ahead you see the soft flicker of a torch. Someone's up early. You paddle gently toward the glow and spot a farmer standing barefoot at the edge of a chinampa, her outline calm and sturdy against the pale water. She's old. Her back bent, her braids silver, and she's already working. Her hands move slowly but precisely, snipping herbs, loosening soil, plucking tiny green tomatoes that will be ripened by lunch. She doesn't look up. She's done this 1,000 times. You beach the canoe gently and step onto the edge of the chinampa. It gives just a little under your weight. Squishy but stable. The plants are organized by habit, not geometry. Chili bushes on the sunny side, low-growing herbs near the shade of a willow maze further inland, where the soil is deeper. You breathe in the scent of it all, earthy, peppery, with a thread of wet clay and something sweet you can't place. This is no ordinary garden. This is a salad altar. And this farmer is not just feeding her family. She's preparing offerings for her table, for her neighbors, and for the gods. You watch as she plucks a handful of amaranth, its red-tipped flowers drooping like sleepy feathers. Amaranth was sacred, high protein, easy to grow, used in ceremonies and molded into doughy effigies with honey and blood. The gods were into carbs and drama. The farmer tucks the amaranth into a basket woven with reed. Then she moves to the chili bushes, small gnarled plants bristling with bright red fruit. They look dangerous. Probably are. One bite of these and you're tasting spice and regret in equal measure. But the Aztecs loved them. Chili wasn't just flavor, it was fuel medicine, even punishment. Misbehaving kids sometimes got a sniff of chili smoke as a warning. You'll just wave from a safe distance. You kneel by a squash vine, its broad leaves covered in dew. Squash was one of the trio, the agricultural holy trinity of maize, beans, and squash. The three sisters. Maize grew tall, beans climbed it. Squash sprawled below, shielding the ground and retaining moisture. A botanical buddy system. You lift a leaf and spot a pale yellow flower blooming wide and soft like a trumpet. Squash blossoms still used today in tacos, tamales, and soups. You smile, wondering how many ancient breakfasts started right here, right like this. But not everything grown here was meant to be eaten. The marigolds at the edge of the plot bloom in fiery clusters, even in dim light. Cempasúchil, the flower of the dead. Their petals guide souls back during Dia de los Muertos, and long before that they adorned Aztec altars, planted not just for beauty but for memory. You touch one gently, soft, fragrant, eternal. The farmer finally turns toward you. Her eyes don't blink with surprise. She just gestures wordlessly to a low basket near your feet. Inside are bundles greens, roots fruit a few small gourds tied with twine. Offerings. You pick it up carefully. It's heavier than it looks, dense with care. Together you walk toward a narrow footbridge leading to a shrine. A tiny earthen structure at the Chinampa's corner, shaded by tree limbs and half swallowed by vines. A simple altar, no skulls, no gold, just a flat stone, a few carved figures, a bit of incense burning low and blue. You place the basket gently in front of it. This offering isn't about fear, it's about gratitude. About acknowledging the sunlight, the water, the soil that didn't wash away, the ducks that didn't eat all the corn, the child who didn't fall in the canal this week. Small victories, big thanks. Historians still debate whether every Chinampa family maintained a shrine like this, or if it was more common in particular districts. Some think shrines were communal. Others argue each farmer had their own adapted over generations. But the practice of making offerings, of blending agriculture with the divine, was everywhere. Planting wasn't just work, it was worship. You sit beside the farmer now, she doesn't speak and neither do you. The silence is companionable, the kind that grows between people who've shared a sunrise or two. You hand her a gourd from the basket and she cracks it open with practiced ease. Inside is a toll cornmeal, gruel warm and thick. She offers you a sip. It's earthy, slightly sweet, hints of cinnamon. Or is that lake water? She laughs softly at your reaction, not mocking, just amused, like she's seen too many visitors choke politely on ancient cuisine. As the sky lightens, you hear movement, paddles on the water, voices murmuring. Other farmers heading to their plots. The city may be distant, but the Chinampa zone is alive and bustling. Every garden is awake now. Even the frogs seem to shift into day mode. A gentle chorus of ribbits rises from the reeds, and then you spot it. Just beyond a curve in the canal, another canoe approaches. It's smaller, and in it sits a man cradling a wooden box. A priest. A trader. He paddles slowly with reverence. As he nears, you see what's in the box, tiny corn figurines painted and tied with feathers. Miniature deities, household gods. They'll be placed along different Chinampas today, one by one. A roving ritual, part market, part mobile altar. You exchange nods as he passes the boat, barely making a ripple. You ask yourself, who fed the gods? The answer floats right here on soft earth between rows of squash and prayer. Chinampas weren't just farms, they were the Mexica's spiritual engine. They gave offerings and took blessings. A cyclical, sustainable spirituality rooted in mud and maize. And if the gods weren't hungry today, no problem. Someone else would eat the offering, nothing wasted, not here, not ever. The old farmer has already gone back to work. Her fingers glide over the soil like she's reading a book. You rise, nod your thanks, and step back into your canoe. It rocks gently. The basket remains at the shrine. A gift, a memory, a whisper of gratitude rising with the steam of morning. You push off from the edge and the water accepts you again. You glide away from the altar. Your canoe light now empty-handed, but somehow fuller. The sun hasn't crested yet, but there's that hush before daylight, when the whole world seems to pause and sip something warm. You drift along a narrow channel, skimming past rows of crops that blink with dew, and suddenly you wrinkle your nose. What is that smell? It's rich, pungent, somewhere between compost and a duck that made a regrettable life choice. You're not imagining it. You've arrived at one of the true secret ingredients of Chinampa's success. Not the sacred maize, not the clever canal system. Nope, the unsung hero of this whole empire in a marsh story, duck poop. The Aztecs were not squeamish. They were brilliant recyclers long before sustainability became a buzzword. If it rotted, they used it. If it squawked and left behind little gifts, even better. You pass a smaller chinampa now, bordered by short poles driven into the muck. Tethered to one of the poles, a woven cage bobbing gently in the water. Inside, a few sleepy ducks blink at you with soft disdain like they know they're royalty here. They aren't caged for meat, though they might end up in a tamale eventually, but more often they're part of the cycle. Free range when possible. Messy, yes, but oh so effective. The canals were full of these quiet workers. Ducks, frogs, fish, all part of a natural feedback loop. Ducks paddled, pooped, and fertilized the surrounding water. Farmers would dredge the canal muck thick with decomposed plant matter, fish waste, and duck droppings and slather it across the Chinampa like some cursed ancient smoothie. The result? Super soil. Moist, nitrogen-rich, dark, and fluffy. It smelled aggressive, but it grew the best chilies you'd ever cry over. Some fringe theories even suggest the Aztecs developed something like primitive hydroponics, allowing plants to root directly into these nutrient-rich canals before being transferred to Chinampas. Historians debate whether this was intentional or just a happy accident of overwatering. Either way, if your lettuce floated away and came back bigger, win. You coast past another plot where a farmer is scooping up canal mud with a flat wooden shovel. He slaps it onto the rows like frosting. His arms are covered in it. So are his knees. There's mud in his eyebrows. He hums softly while he works. This is the morning routine. Not glamorous, but utterly vital. The fertility of these plots wasn't a one-and-done deal. The farmers had to keep feeding the soil, not once a season constantly. No synthetic fertilizers, no garden centers. Just good old-fashioned pond gunk and animal contributions. Human waste, too, in some cases. That's right. Latrines in Tenochtitlan were sometimes linked to collection systems. Waste was gathered, dried, and added to fields. It was a full-circle kind of empire. Gross a little. Effective, you bet. And this wasn't just practical farming, it was cosmically reinforced. Tlaloc, the rain god, didn't just handle the weather forecast. He was associated with fertility storms and the very idea of watery nourishment. Offering up your duck-boosted squash to him wasn't just appeasement, it was collaboration. The farmer fed the soil fed the plant fed the god fed the rain, and the cycle spun on. You paddle toward a wider stretch of canal and pause. Up ahead, a flat platform made of woven reeds juts from the edge of a chinampa. You think it's another resting place until you see what's on it. A small pile of fish guts arranged neatly like someone just finished filleting dinner and decided to donate the leftovers to the greater agricultural good. A few flies hover lazily. A frog pokes its head out of the water, interested but cautious. The fish were part of the system too. The canals weren't just highways and irrigation, they were fisheries. Small ones, yes, but functional. You could catch tilapia axolotls, yes, the adorable aquatic salamanders and other local species. Eat some, leave the rest to fertilize your roots. It's not every empire that turns slime into sustenance. There's even evidence, though scholars go back and forth on this, that night soil. Yep, the poetic name for human waste was occasionally used in more desperate times. Some argue it was common. Others insist it was only for ornamental or non-edible plants. You look around at the glowing marigolds and decide to let the debate continue without you. The more you think about it, the more the Chinampa system feels like a symphony of decomposition. Nothing wasted, everything looped. Death fed life, which fed death again. You wonder if the farmers ever joked about it. Don't worry about your future, you'll grow great tomatoes. You push off from the bank and drift again slower now. The canal narrows and ahead a small shrine rises from the edge of a chinampa, just a few stones and a patch of maize planted in a perfect spiral. Probably Tlaloc's spot. You feel the air shift heavier, more humid. The breath of the god, maybe, or just the nearby duck coop. There's a reason the system lasted centuries. The Chinampas produced year-round, unlike fields that had to rest or rotate crops. Some estimates say they could yield up to 7 harvests annually. 7! In a world where a single bad season could mean famine, the Chinampa system was overachieving. It was less hope this works and more just add water and muck. As you coast past a half-submerged log, a cluster of frogs croaks in unison. Maybe a warning or applause. It's hard to tell with frogs. You nod back respectfully. Not all fertilizer came from animals or canal sludge. Farmers also added decomposed plant matter, wilted leaves, broken stems, leftover husks. Everything had a second life, a third, maybe a fourth. Even the roots of harvested plants were often left in the soil to decompose and return nutrients. The garden didn't just grow, it fed itself. You imagine being a Chinampa farmer with your entire livelihood balanced on compost and weather gods. Your calendar wasn't measured in months, it was counted in layers of muck cycles of planting ducks behaving or misbehaving. It was messy, intimate, alive. You trail your fingers through the water, something soft brushes past, a leaf maybe, or a curious axolotl. Either way, you don't pull back. Not here. Not where everything belongs to everything else. The canoe drifts on and the smell lingers just a little rich. Old, oddly comforting. Like the earth itself just had a good breakfast dot. Your paddle dips again, sending a spiral of ripples across the water, soft and wide. The sun's not up yet, but the sky has brightened to that pale, silvery hue that means morning is just over the edge. The Chinampas stretch around you like long, sleepy arms cradling the canal, and now something else joins the picture. Movement, everywhere. You hear it before you see it. A soft splash, then another. Then the gentle thunk of wooden hulls nudging against shorelines. You've stumbled into rush hour, Aztec style. You drift slowly into a watery grid of intersecting canals and narrow footpaths, and suddenly the sleepy farm lanes feel busy. Canoes slip past loaded with baskets of maize, squash, herbs, flowers, some covered in colorful woven cloths to protect from sun. Some with the cloths tied up like little tents to keep off the dew. In one boat, a woman balances a crate of chickens with a look of fierce concentration. In another, two kids giggle as they paddle furiously with mismatched oars and nearly tip over a pile of chili peppers. This is the other side of Chinampa life. The one with traffic jams. The one with a neighbor yelling across a canal because someone didn't trim their willow branches again. The one where produce has to make it from mud to market by sunrise. You've arrived in the Aztec version of urban logistics, and it's all happening on water. The layout is absurdly well organized. The Chinampas are laid out in long, thin rectangles divided by narrow canals that function like ancient freeways. Short footbridges connect some of them just enough for someone to pass with a heavy basket. The bigger boats' cargo canoes stacked with tamales fruit or marigold garlands move slower while the sleeker ones weave in and out like watery couriers. There's a rhythm to it, and if you watch long enough, you realize it's not chaos. It's choreography. Historians still argue whether this intricate network evolved naturally or if it was master-planned. Did the Mexica sit down with lake blueprints and say, okay, we need 3 east-west canals, 2 cargo lanes, and a roundabout near the god of flower offerings temple? Or did they simply build as they needed, letting the structure emerge over time? The evidence suggests both, and either way it worked. Your canoe drifts near a junction where 3 canals meet. A larger boat clearly from the city center coasts past, guided by a man with arms like woven rope. He nods to you. You nod back. His boat is heavy with bundled maize carefully packed and balanced. He's headed for the Tianquistli, the bustling central market of Tenochtitlán, where farmers sell their Chinampa bounty to traders, cooks, and priests, who probably insist their corn be blessed before being ground into tortillas. And you can't help but marvel at the efficiency. No carts, no beasts of burden, just wood, water, and grit. Everything moves by paddle and canal, even people. Families commute to their garden plots each morning, paddle out with breakfast tucked in banana leaves. Spend the day tending, harvesting, building, blessing. Then they head back before nightfall unless there's a festival, in which case all bets are off. And speaking of festivals, don't think these canals didn't see some action. During major celebrations, flower-covered boats would drift through like slow parades carrying musicians, dancers' offerings. Imagine Venice but with fewer gondoliers singing love songs and more masked warriors waving marigolds. You spot a canoe pulled up beside a plot where a man is standing waist-deep in water, hauling a log into position along the edge. He's rebuilding a Chinampa wall that collapsed after last week's storm. Nearby, a woman plucks flowers and ties them into bundles with strips of dried maize husk. She hands them off to a younger girl in a canoe who spins it around with an elegant flick and disappears down the canal. Express Delivery Ancient Edition. The paths between the Chinampas are narrow, just wide enough for a wheelbarrow or, more realistically, a man with a heavy back and strong legs. You imagine the foot traffic muddy, swift essential. A farmer might carry his produce by land or by canoe depending on weather, weight, or whim. The infrastructure flexed to the needs of the moment. No GPS, no logistics app, just memory, intuition, and one wrong turn that might send your squash into the wrong neighborhood. There's even evidence that the Chinamapa layout was influenced by calendar rituals. Certain rows were assigned crops by season. Some plots were rotated not just for soil health, but to align with religious observances. You couldn't just plant wherever you wanted. Some crops belonged to certain times, certain gods. Your canal commute wasn't just a farmer's errand, it was a sacred schedule. And don't forget maintenance. This watery grid didn't keep itself tidy. Farmers were constantly dredging, repairing footbridges, trimming trees, and clearing aquatic plants from canal intersections. Clumps of water hyacinth could clog up the whole route faster than you could say, "Where's my tamale shipment?" As you drift deeper into the grid, you hear voices soft but insistent. A group of farmers gathered at a junction, pointing toward a fallen tree that's blocking one of the main canals. Someone's fetched a machete, someone else is offering advice no one asked for. A baby wails in a nearby boat, soothed by the gentle slosh of water. You imagine this scene playing out countless times. The community policing itself, fixing the broken bits, making sure the lifelines stay open. One boat nearly sideswipes yours, the paddler wide-eyed and apologetic. He's young, maybe 10, with a boat full of squash and a look that says I overslept, and now the priest is going to yell at me. You smile. He vanishes around a corner. Even in this moment, it's clear the Chinampa system wasn't just an agricultural method. It was a transportation network, a social mesh, a logistical masterpiece. It supported not just crops, but people. Lives, rituals, gossip. If something broke down here, if the canals flooded the dikes, burst the paths crumbled, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was catastrophic. And yet it held together. For centuries. You look around and see why. Everyone had a stake in it. Every paddler, every farmer, every flower seller. They weren't just passing through, they were part of the grid, part of the system. Your canoe slides past a cluster of chinampas where the activity is just beginning to peak. You hear someone call out in Nahuatl, laughter following. A dog barks. Someone else sings a little tune off-key, boats bump, birds scatter. And in the middle of it all, the water keeps moving gently, purposefully, like it knows exactly where it's going. You paddle on part of the current now. Dot the noise fades behind you as you paddle out of the Chinampa grid, slipping into a narrower channel where the water is still and the air grows cooler. The trees lean in again, their branches dipping low like they're trying to whisper something. You've left the morning rush behind, but something else stirs here. This part of the canals feels different. Older somehow, not forgotten, just quieter. And you notice little things. Offerings left at the base of trees. Clay figures tucked into the mud. A strip of cloth tied around a reed bundle like a secret signal. The frogs are louder here. The birds don't seem in a rush to be anywhere. And then there's that feeling like you're being watched, not by people. This is where the guardians live. The Mexica never saw their floating gardens as just practical plots of land. The Chinampas were part of the spiritual ecosystem too, inhabited by creatures, spirits, and stories that existed alongside the crops. It wasn't enough to farm well. You had to respect the land, or things might happen. Take the frogs, for instance. You hear one croak loudly nearby, then another as if responding. A whole chorus kicks in. To the untrained ear, it's just amphibious noise, but to an Aztec farmer, frogs were weather prophets. A sudden burst of croaking rain's coming. Silence when it shouldn't be. Something's off. The frogs were informants, little swampy messengers of the gods. You pass a patch of water lilies blooming in the corner of a small canal fork, their flat leaves floating like lazy shields. Just beneath them, something moves fast, sleek. Probably a fish, possibly something else. Because here's the thing, not everything in these waters was supposed to be touched. Some chinampas had rules, not written ones, but rules you knew. Don't walk that canal path after dusk. Don't touch that tree with the red cord. Don't fish near the old shrine. Why? Because there were watchers, spirits, water beings. The aho who ate trees, especially those gnarled old giants, were said to be inhabited by nawals, shape-shifting creatures that blurred the line between human and animal. Not quite evil, not quite good, just watching. You steer your canoe carefully around one such tree now. Its roots dive straight into the canal, thick and knotted like frozen waves. At its base, a small pile of stones deliberately placed. An offering, maybe, or a warning. There's an old tale of a farmer who ignored the signs. He expanded his chinampa too far, digging into a grove that had long been avoided. He cleared the roots, built his garden, had a record harvest chilies so big they needed 2 hands to carry. But then the water turned murky. The frogs went silent. One night, the crops wilted overnight. He heard whispering outside his hut. When he went to investigate, he never came back. In the morning, only his footprints remained leading into the water. Historians dismiss it, of course, say it's myth, local superstition. But even now, in the surviving Chinampa zones, you'll find people who leave bowls of food at the edge of the water, especially during planting season. Not because they believe in monsters, but because, well, just in case. You pass another plot where a clay figurine rests beside a young maize stalk. It's no taller than your hand, crudely shaped wide eyes, open mouth, arms raised. It could be a toy. Or a representation of Chicomacoatl, goddess of agriculture. She was associated with fertility, food, and nourishment. Basically, if your plot had a good year, you thanked her. If it had a bad one, well, maybe you forgot last time. The air grows thicker here, the smell of damp wood stronger. A pair of owls watches you from a low branch, utterly still. Their heads tilt as you pass, perfectly synchronized. It's probably fine. Not all the spirits of the Chinampas were ominous. Some were playful, mischievous. Trickster gods like Huehuecoyotl, the old coyote. Farmers swore he'd steal tools left out overnight or switch crops between plots just to mess with you. Leave your squash and find amaranth instead. His laugh was said to echo through the canals, usually just after someone stubbed their toe. You pause at a fork in the canal. The left path is wider, safer. The right narrower and dark under the canopy. A single dragonfly hovers over the right path. The water there looks thicker, like it's waiting for you to make a choice. You take the left. You're brave, sure, but not stupid. Some say the spirits of the Chinampas were the old gods themselves, lingering after the Spanish conquest, hiding in the roots, the reeds, the birds. They couldn't protect the temples or the warriors, but they could still protect the gardens. So they did. There's a spot up ahead where the water deepens. Too deep for planting, too narrow for fishing. Locals once called it El Espejo del Maíz, the mirror of the corn. On windless nights, it reflects the stars so perfectly you feel like you're floating in space. But no one plants there. No one builds there. Even the trees seem to lean away from it. The story goes that this patch is where the first Chinampa was born, built not by humans, but by the gods as a test. They filled it with perfect soil, but no matter what was planted, nothing would grow. A reminder that the land must be earned, not stolen. You drift to the edge of one garden plot and spot a circle of feathers embedded in the dirt. Bright blue. From a quetzal bird, perhaps, not native to this region, which means someone brought it here deliberately. A blessing, a message, or just someone hoping for a particularly good chili harvest. Even in death, the old beliefs hang on like tree roots, tangled and persistent. The Spanish tried to erase them, of course. Built churches, banned rituals, scolded farmers for leaving tamales at the water's edge. But the spirits were already too deep in the soil, too soaked into the canals to be washed away. You look down into the water, your own reflection ripples back at you. For a moment, it shifts, distorts. You blink. It's normal again. Probably just the current, or maybe something else blinked first. You paddle on quietly. The frogs resume their croaking. The owls flutter away. And the canal widens again, the shadows thinning. You're back in the world of crops and commerce. But a part of you stays behind, tangled in the roots and whispers. Watched, respected. Just like the Chinampas prefer dot. The sun finally peeks over the edge of the hills, casting long golden streaks across the water. The reeds light up like spears of honey. A heron lifts off from a Chinampa corner, its wings stretched wide, silent as a thought. And then right on cue comes the sound of music. It's faint at first. Just a soft thrum, a distant strum, something metallic being tapped in rhythm. Your ears perk up. Your paddle slows and the canoe drifts lazily toward the noise. You round a bend and find the source, a wide canal, Chinampas, lining both sides and a small flotilla of canoes bumping gently into one another. But these aren't cargo boats. These are party boats. That's right, you've stumbled into the ancient version of the snack boat. Floating vendors, market canoes, musicians on the water. Welcome to the Chinampa cafeteria. The first boat you pass is packed with tamales, steaming bundles wrapped in green husks, stacked neatly in woven baskets. The woman paddling it calls out in a sing-song voice listing ingredients: chili and squash blossom, amaranth and honey, duck and epazote. She steers with one hand and hands over a tamale with the other smooth as silk. The customer? Another farmer in a canoe eating breakfast with one paddle resting across her knees. This isn't a festival, this is just Tuesday. Further along, another canoe glides by carrying jugs of atoll, a warm, thick corn drink, flavored with cinnamon and sometimes cacao. The vendor, an older man with a mustache so perfectly groomed you suspect divine intervention, dips a ladle into one of the jars and pours it into a gourd cup with a flick of his wrist. No splash, no waste. He smiles at you, you wave. He raises the ladle in salute and moves on. These snack boats, as they're jokingly called now, were vital. They weren't just selling food, they were binding the whole system together. Farming on the Chinampas could be solitary, even monotonous. But once the canoes came around with music, gossip, and breakfast, everything changed. They turned work into community, into rhythm, into a floating neighborhood. You drift along with them, now part of this curious little waterborne village. A group of younger boys paddles by their canoes stacked with marigold bundles and clay pots. They're laughing about something, probably a story they're too young to keep quiet. One of them reaches into a pouch and throws a handful of toasted corn kernels into your canoe as a gift or possibly a prank. They don't explain, just paddle faster and vanish around a bend. Historians still debate how formal these floating vendors were. Were they licensed? Were routes assigned? Some accounts suggest certain families controlled sections of the canal-based economy, passing down vendor rights like chinampas themselves. Others believe it was more open, whoever had a boat and something to sell sold. Like a farmer's market without the folding tables. You pull up beside a floating music boat, just three people with handheld drums and flutes made of bone and wood, playing a tune that's hypnotic and strangely bouncy. The percussion echoes off the canal walls, making the chinampas feel like they're pulsing along. Music on the water wasn't rare. It was part of the rhythm of the day. Some say it was even ritual. Certain melodies tied to planting time's harvest blessings, or thanks to Tlaloc for not flooding your squash again. And don't think this ecosystem didn't have its own brand of drama. You pass a canoe where two women are clearly in a heated exchange, half serious, half laughing about pricing. One gestures with a bundle of herbs, the other waves a tamal like a very spicy point of emphasis. Eventually, a trade is made. A small fish for a handful of mint. Both parties grumble theatrically, then they laugh, paddle off, and wave over the cacao vendor. This floating trade system was part of the larger economic network that fed Tenochtitlan's appetite. The Chinampas produced the food, but without these vendor boats, the food stayed where it was. Not everyone in the city was a farmer. Many were artisans, merchants, priests, soldiers. They relied on the morning influx of produce and tamales to stock the markets. Boats loaded in the marshlands at dawn and docked at the causeways and piers of Tenochtitlan by midday. A paddle-powered supply chain, no warehouses needed. You catch the scent of something else now. Smoky sweet. Ahead, a canoe trails thin wisps of smoke from a tiny clay stove mounted in the center. The vendor is roasting cacao beans. She's grinding them with a metate, her arms moving in a slow, steady rhythm. The paste she makes will be mixed with water, maybe honey, maybe chili. Not a modern hot chocolate, but something richer, earthier. A drink of the gods, and the very rich. You watch her pour a thick line of it into a waiting gourd. Someone pays her with a tiny carved pendant. No coins, just barter, beauty, and balance. A fringe theory suggests some of these floating vendors were also informants. Messengers moving between Chinampas temples and city centers carrying gossip along with groceries. You imagine a tamale vendor whispering, "The priest's maze is growing crooked again," or someone saw a jaguar track near the edge plot. Information traveled faster on these canals than anyone ever expected. And of course, not all the boats were for food. One passes you now filled with pottery bowls, cups, tiny effigies. The vendor greets another with a quick handshake. Hands off a bowl, receives a wrap bundle in return, and just like that, an exchange is made. No receipts, no returns. Just trust and maybe a curse if you try to cheat. You reach a fork in the canal and pause. Around you, the water glitters now in full morning light. The snack boats begin to thin, heading toward different districts. Some vanish down side channels, others pass by toward the city proper. You watch them go, the flutes fading, the tamale steam, trailing the scent of corn and clay dissolving into the breeze. It's oddly moving, this daily ritual. Simple but essential. The gardens fed the city, yes, but these boats, these floating vendors and musicians, fed the spirit of the lake. They kept the Chinampas from becoming just fields. They made them places lively, noisy, sacred, and silly all at once. You smile. You didn't expect to find tamales and gossip on this quiet, watery ride. But here you are, full happy, and maybe a little sunburned. You paddle on slower now. The boats drift behind you. The gardens stretch ahead dot. The sun's climbing now, painting long golden streaks across the canals and bouncing sharp reflections off the rippling surface. Birds flit between trees. A fish jumps briefly gleaming. You paddle through the light, blinking at the warmth. It's peaceful. So peaceful, in fact, you almost forget the part where everything comes crashing down. Because one day across the lake and mountains they saw sails. The Spaniards. Cortez and company, dirty boots, shiny armor. Unfamiliar diseases, unfamiliar ideas. They came from another world entirely, one with horses, steel swords, and the highly problematic belief that all this, the chinampas, the markets, the pyramids, the whole floating, flowering miracle was theirs now. At first, the chinampas must have confused the invaders. Imagine arriving in a swamp you can't even walk across, only to see entire farms bobbing in the shallows. Farmers knee-deep in water, feeding chili to ducks, and flower vendors paddling past like it's the most normal thing in the world. Horses couldn't cross the canals. Armor made the boats top-heavy. The city didn't make sense to them. Tenochtitlan was like a fever dream version of Venice, but with fewer gondolas and more ritual sacrifice. But Cortez didn't care about the gardens. He had bigger plans. You glide your canoe toward the center of what was once the heart of the lake, the capital itself. Imagine it then, the mighty Templo Mayor, rising high over the water, the marketplaces swarming with thousands of traders, the sound of drums echoing across the causeways. Now, the water ripples quietly. But you feel it. The weight of it all. The before. And then came the after. When the conquest began in earnest, the Chinampas became battlefields. The Spaniards teamed up with indigenous allies, especially the Tlaxcalans, enemies of the Mexica, and together they closed in. The canals became traps. The Aztecs tried to defend from the water, but the invaders built boats, armed them, cut off supply lines. It was naval warfare in a lake the size of a city. One theory says the Mexica scuttled their own chinampas, sinking plots into the canal entrances to block Spanish movement. Others argue they used them as cover for ambushes, hiding behind tall maize, slipping between the rows and canoes with bows and obsidian-tipped spears. Historians still debate how organized the Chinampa resistance was. Was it a coordinated defense or desperate improvisation? Either way, the battles weren't just fought on streets. They were fought in water, in mud, in gardens that had once grown marigolds for gods. You paddle past a row of half-submerged stakes, rotted, broken, barely visible now. Maybe old corner markers, maybe a forgotten defense line, maybe just ghosts. The siege of Tenochtitlan was brutal. Months of starvation, disease, warfare. And the Chinampas, once the lungs of the city, began to choke. With soldiers trampling them, supply lines cut, and disease rippling through the population. There was no one left to dredge mud, to bless the trees, to scatter duck droppings and hope. The gardens began to fail, not all at once, but enough. Enough that the city began to die from the roots up. You close your eyes for a moment. Think of a farmer watching as smoke rises over the water, hearing the clash of metal and obsidian, clutching a clay figurine and not knowing if they'll harvest again. Think of the canals clogged with canoes, not bearing tamales and flowers now, but blood and ash. And then the fall. August 1521. Tenochtitlan burned, its temples razed, its causeways broken. And yet, the Chinampas. Some of them survived. Because conquest doesn't erase everything, not completely. In the aftermath, the Spanish began rebuilding the city on top of the ruins. They drained sections of the lake, filled in canals, built churches over temples, but they couldn't fill in all of it. Some parts of the lake were just too stubborn, too soggy, and the Chinampas still there, still growing, even as the empire around them changed. Some of the very people who'd fought the Spaniards now worked for them, farming the same plots, paddling the same canals, offering the same flowers. Not in temples now, but in churches. Not to Tlaloc, but to saints with vaguely similar responsibilities. You pass a Chinampa now where young maize grows in neat rows, and you can almost see the layers of history underneath. Mexica hands, colonial hands, modern ones, all reaching into the same soil. There's a strange resilience here, a quiet defiance. The Spanish tried to impose new systems, new crops, New taxes, new gods, but the land didn't care. The soil still asked for mud, for water, for fish guts and feathers. And the people, they knew how to listen. They had been listening for centuries. It wasn't all peaceful, of course. The colonial period brought regulations, restrictions. Some Chinampa zones were repurposed, sold, seized. Missionaries disapproved of old rituals, and yet, under the surface, things continued. A flower left at a canal's edge. A whispered blessing before planting. A duck fed not just for meat, but for memory. There's even a story, probably apocryphal, of a Spanish priest who began planting maize on his own Chinampa, then consulted with the same local farmer each year to make sure he was doing it the right way. The farmer, of course, always started by blessing the soil. The priest claimed it was for the insects, but he never skipped the ritual. You smile. Some truths are too deep to dig out. Your canoe turns gently down a side canal, still narrow, still shaded. The Chinampas here are older, some half abandoned, but green. Always green, something always growing. It's hard not to be moved by it. These were more than farms, they were foundations. And they didn't die when the city fell. They adapted, sank a little deeper, grew differently. But they didn't stop. The conquest tried to overwrite a world, and in many ways it succeeded. But the Chinampas, they just kept feeding people. The paddle cuts silently through the water, carving a path between tall reeds as you drift into the post-conquest landscape. The air feels heavier now, not from the weather, but from the strange stillness of a world rearranging itself. Behind you, Tenochtitlan is ashes and altar stones. Ahead, the Chinampas stretch on quiet but alive. Because even as empires toppled and new ones rose, the gardens didn't wait. They never could. The Spanish took the city, the gold, the temples, but they didn't take the mud. They couldn't. The Chinampas were rooted too deep, too wide, too necessary. Crops still had to grow. People still had to eat. And the same people who once laid offerings at shrines were back in their canoes by sunrise, scooping canal mud, whispering old prayers under their breath. Out loud they said, Padre Nuestro, but the rhythm of their hands still belonged to Tlaloc. This was the age of survival through stubbornness. You coast beside a series of garden plots that look oddly symmetrical. These aren't just any Chinampas, they've been restructured. Some Spanish friar probably sketched a better design, something more European, more boxy, more understandable. But underneath the same mud, the same logs, the same willow roots holding everything in place, defying the grid in their slow, tangled way, historians call this era transitional, as if change came gently. It didn't. Entire communities were uprooted, laws rewritten. Land was seized and redistributed. Some Chinampa zones were sold to Spanish landowners who had no clue how to maintain them. They tried, of course. Hired the same local farmers they'd once considered heathens to teach them how to make the gardens grow. Sometimes they even paid them. You paddle near a small floating hut. A simple shelter made of thatch and wood, probably rebuilt 100 times over. Inside, you spot a pile of tools, digging sticks, woven baskets, a canoe paddle worn smooth by generations of calloused hands. It's a home or a storage hut or both. You can picture it through the centuries unchanged, except for maybe the color of the shawls hanging inside. Even under colonial rule, the Chinampas adapted. Some zones were converted to European crops, wheat, barley, even grapes. But the land didn't love it. The water held on to its memory. Maize grew best. Beans thrived. Tomatoes refused to leave. Like stubborn tenants, the native plants knew how to live here. They refused eviction. Floods still came. And when they did, the Spaniards panicked. They drained so much of the lake to build their new Spain that they never quite understood how the system worked. Drainage made sense to them, solid land, firm footing roads that didn't squelch. But the more they drained, the more the Chinampa network suffered. The balance between water and mud began to falter. In 1629, a catastrophic flood swallowed much of Mexico City for 5 years. 5, not 5 days, not even 5 months. The Spanish blamed the weather. Locals perhaps more wisely blamed the fact that they had spent decades destroying the very wetlands that had once controlled the floods. You can't tear out the lungs and expect the body to breathe. You drift past a plot now overgrown with brush, once a productive Chinampa, now wild. Vines climb what used to be tomato poles. The earth still looks soft and dark. You could plant something there today and it would grow. The land hasn't forgotten. And even amid the chaos, the people kept farming. Some did it in secret, planting by moonlight, hiding sacred herbs among the wheat. Others worked openly but quietly, transforming Chinampas into subtle acts of rebellion. Every time they grew native crops, every time they taught their children the old planting songs, every time they fertilized with fish guts instead of imported ash they resisted. A fringe theory suggests some of the colonial-era Chinampa farmers deliberately maintained decoy plots, poorly maintained underproductive gardens shown to Spanish overseers while their real bounty was harvested by canoe at night. Hidden plots tucked into the maze of lesser-known canals, a bit of sleight of hand by moonlight. Historians disagree, of course, but doesn't it feel like something they would have done? You paddle near a man fishing from a canoe. His net is cast wide, his motion rhythmic, unbothered. He doesn't speak, just nods as you pass. That rhythm, it hasn't changed in centuries. Same net, same fish, probably the same technique someone used before Cortez ever tied his boots. And there were still festivals, not the massive blood-filled spectacles of the Mexica Prime, but quieter versions. A flower market held on a saint's day where someone accidentally arranges their bouquet in the shape of the sun god's symbol. A chili harvest blessed by a priest in Latin but eaten with hands that still remember the old ways. The Chinampa system refused to die because it wasn't just technology, it was culture. Memory, identity disguised as agriculture. You pass an area where several Chinampas lie in various stages of repair. One has fresh poles staked at its corners. Another is being dredged and rebuilt. A third is completely underwater, the top of a willow tree poking through like a drowned antenna. A young boy stands barefoot at the edge of one plot, tossing handfuls of something, probably feed or seed, into the water. He hums while he works, not a song you recognize. Maybe not a song at all, just sound passed down through blood. The canal still carried people too. Vendors didn't disappear, the snack boats adapted. Now they sold churros next to tamales, prayer candles beside marigold bundles. Life didn't vanish, it shifted. Wore new clothes, learned new words. But underneath the paddles still dipped the same way. The more things changed, the more they kept growing. That's what the Chinampas taught. You can flood it, conquer it, rename it. But if the roots are strong enough, the garden comes back. You trail your fingers through the water. It's warm now, the sun fully up. A frog jumps from a log landing with a splash. Somewhere a bird calls out a trill, then silence. You smile. Still here. Still growing dot. The canal ahead widens into a slow, gentle bend. The water glimmers sunlight dancing across its rippled surface like it's trying to forget centuries of conquest and flooding. On either side, the Chinampas continue, some alive and thriving, others ghostly with overgrowth. But now, as you drift onward, you start to notice something else. Ink, paper, crosses carved into tree bark, and a man sitting on a half-sunken log sketching furiously while swatting at mosquitoes. You've drifted into the era of the missionaries. After the conquest, once the temples were toppled and the gods branded idols, a new group of visitors arrived to claim the land, this time not with swords, but sermons. Spanish friars flooded the region, especially Franciscans, Dominicans, and Augustinians, all eager to save the souls of the local people, one confession and one Chinampa at a time. And one thing they did almost obsessively, they made maps. You pause your canoe beside a Chinampa, where several wooden stakes have been painted with red crosses. A figure in a long brown robe is leaning over, mumbling to himself as he draws, then glances up, then draws again. He's not farming, he's documenting, plot by plot, canal by canal. Historians still argue whether the missionaries were just trying to keep tidy records of newly converted districts, or whether these maps were a form of quiet land surveillance, a sneaky way to measure and parcel out indigenous lands for future appropriation. Because nothing says humble servant of God like drawing really detailed property lines. Some of these friars even sketched Chinampa layouts in astonishing detail. You could see which crops were planted where, who lived on which plot, how wide the canals were. Some maps showed where shrines used to be with ominous crosses placed over them like spiritual no trespassing signs. But here's the twist: in the process of trying to erase the old ways, these friars preserved them. Thanks to those maps, we now know just how extensive the Chinampa system once was, how it stretched far beyond what modern canals reveal, how intricate, how purposeful, how stubbornly efficient it all was. It's like they tried to bury the culture with paper and ended up building a time capsule. You drift past a Chinampa where the crops are arranged in a perfect spiral. That's not just practical, that's ceremonial, a pattern older than Spanish boots. A farmer steps from his hut, glances at you, then walks to the edge and spits into the water, not out of disrespect, but as a quiet offering. A habit, maybe just superstition, maybe more. Because even with the friars watching with crosses nailed to trees and sermons echoing over the marshes, The old ways clung on, planted like amaranth in the cracks. You spot a small clay figure tucked into the roots of a willow tree. Its features are worn. Could it be a saint? Could be an old god with a new name? That happened more than you'd think. The Virgin Mary started looking a lot like Tonantzin, the Mexica earth goddess. Tlaloc got confused with Saint Isidore. The people knew the game. They painted the same symbols with different names, nodded when asked, and went right back to planting maize by the lunar cycle. Even the missionaries had to admit these Chinampa folks knew their land, their plants, their water, so much so that some friars started asking them for help. Which mud should I use for my vineyard? Why does this canal keep flooding? Why does your maize look better than mine? The locals would smile politely, explain it slowly again, and keep a few tricks to themselves. You pass a plot where a thin trail of smoke rises from a thatch roof kitchen. Someone's making tortillas. The smell hits you, warm toasted corn, a hint of char. You'd give half a canoe for one right now. The woman inside hums an old song, not Spanish, not even Nahuatl. Something in between. That was the other legacy of the friars' language. They wanted to teach Spanish, yes, but they also documented indigenous tongues, created dictionaries, taught literacy, sometimes even to children. And guess what those kids wrote about? Their families, their gardens, their chinampas. Some of the earliest indigenous written texts after conquest are about farming. And not generic stuff, actual descriptions of how to grow maize on a chinampa, how to repair a collapsed corner, how to make duck poop useful. These weren't just survival manuals, they were defiance in disguise. A quiet message. We're still here, still growing. One fringe theory even suggests that some farmers deliberately misled the friars, pointing out the wrong plots, exaggerating water levels, or inventing ghost stories to keep them out of sacred zones. Don't go down that canal, they'd whisper. The lake spirits pull you in. And the friars, bless them, believed every word. You pass another group of sketches nailed to a pole, faded now, but still legible. One is a diagram of a chinampa showing where the maize grows best. Another has a little prayer scribbled in the corner, half in Latin, half in Nahuatl. A farmer's note to the divine, hedging bets in two languages. It's not all suspicion and subversion, though. Some friars genuinely admired the Chinampa system, called it ingenious, remarked on its abundance, its beauty. One even wrote that it was a gift from God hidden in the waters. He meant it as a compliment, but the locals probably just smiled and said, yes, our gods hid it here a long time ago. You pull your paddle in for a moment, let the canoe coast. Around you the Chinampas stretch on, some well-tended, some wild. All of them still speaking if you know how to listen. The friars came with maps and crosses, but the gardens never stopped humming in Nahuatl. You glance at a tree where 3 ribbons hang red, white, and blue, not colonial colors, just old meanings. Blood, water, and sky. You paddle on dot. You paddle through a canal that narrows again, reed walls pressing gently inward as if guiding you somewhere with soft insistence. There's a hush in the air, not the eerie silence of ghosts or gods, but the kind that follows long survival. Like a garden that's grown through storms and pruning shears bending, but never breaking. You're gliding through history's leftovers, but they're not dead. They're thriving. By now, most empires would be dust, their systems dismantled. But here in these squishy rectangles of earth surrounded by 1,000 miles of bureaucracy and concrete, the Chinampa system refuses to die. If anything, it's getting feisty. You round a bend and spot a small sign nailed to a tree, Xochimilco. This is one of the few places where the ancient system is still alive, not as a dusty memory, but a fully functioning growing greening miracle. The post-colonial period didn't do Chinampas any favors. As Mexico City sprawled outward through the 19th and 20th centuries, suburbs crept toward the water. Roads replaced causeways. Developers drained sections of the lake. Chinampa zones were paved, sold, or abandoned to the weeds. But here's the twist: the ones that survived did so because of their inconvenience. They were too swampy, too remote, too complicated to bulldoze. So they stayed. By the 1950s, it looked bleak. Canal water was polluted, urban pressure mounted, the gardens shrank. But then something strange happened. People started to miss them. Not just locals, but urbanites, artists, historians, farmers, and eventually tourists. You glide past a chinampa with perfect rows of herbs, cilantro, epazote, rosemary. You spot tomatoes, charred lettuce. Not ancient crops, but not foreign either. They grow here because the soil still listens. This isn't reenactment farming. This is real food, for real people. Right now, one farmer waves to you from her plot. She wears rubber boots and a sun hat, and in her hands is a smartphone playing music from a small speaker tucked inside a basket of squash. The playlist includes cumbia and something that sounds suspiciously like Taylor Swift, remixed with maracas. You wave back. This is the 21 St. Century Chinampa, half tradition, half TikTok. And guess what? It works. Urban farms in Xochimilco now supply Mexico City's trendy restaurants with hyper-local produce. Ever had a taco with greens grown in pre-Hispanic soil and delivered by canoe? You probably have if you've ever paid $30 for a tasting menu with a side of irony. The farmers today are a mix of descendants and newcomers. Some families have worked the same plots for generations. Others came here seeking a quieter life and ended up ankle-deep in duck fertilizer. But they all learned the rhythm. How to dredge the mud, when to plant maize, what canal is clogged again with water hyacinth. And the same challenges remain: pollution, development, neglect. The lake's water isn't what it once was, and urban runoff causes no shortage of problems. But people fight for it. Organize cleanups. Pressure the government. There are conservation zones now, protected heritage areas, school programs where kids learn how to rebuild chinampas. Volunteers paddle out to help repair crumbling plots. A fringe movement even suggests reviving chinampas in other cities. Imagine it floating gardens in New York's rivers, urban farms in Tokyo's floodplains. It's not so far-fetched. The climate's shifting, the land's flooding. And here's this ancient model humming quietly in the background, saying, "I told you so." You pull your canoe beside a chinampa that's clearly part of a new project. Solar panels rise above one edge. Drip irrigation lines run between rows of kale. And in the corner, a small altar stone, mossy and still bearing a few wilted marigolds. Technology and tradition coexisting without tension. No one asked permission, they just did it. Historians don't always know what to do with this part. It's not past enough for archaeology, not mainstream enough for city planning. But the Chinampa system doesn't care about categories, it just grows. Even the animals still know. You hear ducks before you see them, dozens of them waddling between rows of spinach. A heron lifts off from a corner post. Frogs splash in the shallows, the same frogs maybe that sang warnings to ancient farmers. Now they croak next to a Bluetooth speaker. A younger farmer approaches in a long, shallow boat. What once might have carried offerings or obsidian tools now carries a crate labeled organic microgreens. He nods at you. "Todo bien?" he asks. You nod back. "Todo bien." He paddles on. Some Chinampa farms now have QR codes. You can scan them and see the history of the plot. The crops being grown, the current farmer's name. Some deliver to city kitchens by bike or electric boat. Some have become ecotourism hubs. Visitors plant seedlings, eat Chinampa-grown food, listen to stories. Is it commercial a little, but it also keeps the water flowing. And the story's alive. You drift past one boat where a young couple is filming a vlog talking about their Back to the Land project while balancing two mismatched paddles and nearly capsizing. They're grinning. They're muddy. They're learning. This isn't nostalgia. It's renewal. The old system survives not because it's romantic, but because it works. Because even after droughts, floods, conquest, and condos, a garden held up by trees and mud can still grow enough squash to feed a city. You pause for a moment. Let the breeze carry the scent of basil and lake water. You hear laughter from a boat behind you. See flowers being arranged in a canoe ahead. The canal bends gently. The Chinampas continue. Still here. Still stubborn. Still beautiful dot. The sun is high now, casting sharp shadows beneath the willows and warming the reeds until they give off that sleepy scent of fresh earth and green water. You're gliding through Xochimilco proper now, the famous part. The one people know from postcards and party boats. The one where Chinampas meet mariachi and centuries of quiet farming get a little bit festive. It's louder here. You round a bend in the canal and there it is. A bright pink boat trimmed in yellow and orange paint drifting slowly past under a canopy of fluttering popple picado. On board. A group of tourists clinking beer bottles and waving at anyone who will wave back. You do, of course. A man in the corner is already passed out on a bench. It's barely noon. Classic. Welcome to modern Chinampa life, part heritage site, part floating fiesta. But even under the neon colors and balloon garlands, the foundations haven't changed. The water is still the same soft murk that fed maize 700 years ago. The Chinampas are still there just behind the music. On the quieter side of the canal, you pass one where squash vines crawl along a row of dark soil. The farmer gives a small wave and goes back to hoeing. The land doesn't care if there's a tuba solo happening next door. The squash waits for no one. Hey. This strange coexistence agriculture and tourism marigolds and mariachi is what keeps the modern Chinampas alive. Some plots are now tended as part of eco-tours where city dwellers escape their apartments to paddle for an hour and plant a symbolic sprig of cilantro. Others still run as full-time farms producing greens and herbs for high-end chefs in the capital. And still others, well, they host quinceañeras on weekends. Historians don't quite know what to make of this. Some lament the commercialization, say the canals have become carnival rides. Others argue it's this fusion, this blend of reverence and recreation that's keeping the system visible. After all, would most people know chinampas even existed, if not for the floating birthday parties and beer coolers? You pass a boat with a hand-painted sign that reads, Cosechas con cumbia, harvest with cumbia. Two men on the deck are selling fresh herbs and chilled drinks, bobbing along to a tinny speaker playing a remix of La Cucaracha with bass. Another boat pulls up next to them. A trade is made, a laugh, a handshake, ancient commerce dressed in party clothes. Further along, you pass through a narrow stretch where the sound begins to fade again. Here, the Chinampas feel closer to their roots, literally. The willows are taller, older, the color softer. You can see which plots are used for demonstrations and educational projects that teach students how the Aztecs fed a capital city. You spot a group of schoolchildren pulling up weeds and shrieking every time they uncover a worm. A young teacher in boots is explaining how maize and beans work together in the soil. The kids are barely listening. But their hands are in the mud. That's what matters. Some of these plots have been rebuilt using old designs, wooden barriers reinforced with willow posts, canal edges carefully dredged and layered. It's reconstruction, yes, but done by people who know what they're rebuilding. Descendants, neighbors, botanists and farmers working side by side. You float past one chinampa where volunteers are laying out long mats of aquatic vegetation. Lakeweed mostly scooped from the canal's surface drying in the sun. Soon it'll be added to the soil to refresh it. The same technique the Mexica used when the gods still walked these shores. You imagine someone trying to explain it on a PowerPoint. Step 1. Gather duckweed. Step 2. Pile it on your vegetables. Step 3. Profit. It still works. And yes, there are problems. You see them too. Trash floating in some corners. Plastic bottles. Old wrappers. Canal water that once ran sweet now carries the runoff of a sprawling city. Pollution is the new siege. It's slower than Cortez, but just as dangerous. Farmers talk about algae blooms, fish die-offs. The lake is sick in places, but not dead. Activists and community leaders fight to keep it breathing. Conservation groups host canal cleanups. Schools adopt plots. Environmental scientists take water samples. A few years ago, there was even an effort to reintroduce axolotls to certain Chinampa canals, those strange wide-eyed amphibians that once darted through these waters like miniature dragons. Not for pets, for balance, for memory. And through it all, the music keeps drifting. You pass another boat, this one with a single man and a harp. He plays slowly, almost like he's talking to the water. A woman sits in the back, silent, slicing mangoes into neat cubes and handing them out in little clay bowls. You float by without speaking, just listening, just drifting. In a strange way, it all fits. The music, the mangoes, the marigolds that still bloom along the banks, even with party trash nearby. The Chinampa isn't a museum, it's not frozen, it's living. And living things are messy, contradictory, noisy. It's easy to be nostalgic for the past, to want the canals to go back to silent paddles and sacred planting songs. But maybe this is just another phase, just like after the conquest, just like after the floods, just like after the missionaries with their maps. Maybe it doesn't have to be pure to be powerful. You reach a quiet corner now, far from the music. A Chinampa rests under the shade of 3 tall trees. No signs, no tourists, just a few rows of maize and a hammock swaying in the breeze. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the past and present stacked on top of each other like soil layers. The old gods, the colonial priests, the smartphone farmers, all planting, all harvesting, all still here. You open your eyes and paddle on. You're deeper in now. Past the noise, the tourists, the schoolchildren in canoes, and the hipster farmers with their compost apps. The canal has thinned again, the water glassy and smooth. The reeds brush in close. It's quiet here, quiet in that way that feels sacred. You've arrived at the edge of the Chinampa zone. Not the end, because gardens don't end, they just soften, but the edge. The place where things slow down, where time seems to sit on the water's surface like a floating leaf still and full of breath. You pass an old Chinampa, its borders barely holding. One side has caved in, swallowed slowly by the canal, but something still grows maize tall and golden stubborn in its last season. A few marigolds crouch at the base petals like faded flame. You wonder who planted them. Maybe someone long gone. Maybe someone who'll come back tomorrow. Either way, the roots stayed. This is where the system breathes, not with fanfare, not with city contracts or UNESCO banners, but with rhythm, with memory. In the shade of a wide tree, a hewhowit maybe, or an ancient willow, you let your paddle rest. The canoe drifts lazily now, nudged only by the breeze. You lean back, feeling the wood beneath you, the subtle bob of the water. Above you, the leaves filter the sunlight into ripples. Below, fish flicker like silver thoughts. And you think after all this, after canals and conquerors and duck fertilizer and flower vendors with Bluetooth speakers, what's really left? This. A system that wasn't just clever, it was generous. It fed cities, spirits, empires. And now it feeds the ground beneath your feet and the memory behind your eyes. Still, the Chinampas taught that nothing goes to waste. Not a drop of water, not a scrap of compost, not a single sunrise. Every planting, every harvest was part of a conversation. Between people, between the land and the gods, between what was and what could be. Historians still argue whether the system could be revived at scale, whether it could solve modern food deserts, whether we're even capable of building something like it again. But the Chinampas don't argue. They just grow, quietly, persistently, in the background of a city that barely remembers how to listen. You drift past one final garden. This one is small, trimmed. Someone is working in it, an old man in a wide hat slowly turning the soil with a paddle. He hums as he moves. You can't hear the tune, you don't need to. He doesn't look up, doesn't need to. He knows you're passing. He knows the water carries everything worth knowing. The sun dips just a little, casting long shadows over the plots. The air cools. A frog croaks soft and sleepy. Somewhere, a duck flaps its wings and settles in for the evening. You close your eyes, let your breath slow, let the boat drift. Still here, still floating, still rooted. Let yourself settle now. Let your breath slow like the water beneath the canoe, gentle, rhythmic, steady. You're surrounded by soft earth and sleeping trees, by the distant call of birds settling in the tall reeds. The air is thick with the scent of damp soil, warm leaves, and the faintest trace of maize still lingering from the harvest. The Chinampas are quiet, not silent, just resting, just breathing, like you. The canoe rocks gently, cradled by the canal's embrace. Each movement is slow, deliberate, without urgency. The water carries you without effort. No paddling, no pushing, just drifting. In the shadows of the willows, fireflies begin to blink soft golden pulses like heartbeat signals from another time. The stars slip into the sky one by one, reflecting gently in the water's surface like the past reaching up to meet the present. Nothing here is loud, nothing here is in a hurry. The gardens sleep, the gods sleep, even the frogs grow quiet. You are safe here. Safe in the floating, rooted stillness of the Chinampa world. You don't need to do anything. Don't need to be anything. Just drift. Just breathe. Let the soil hold you. Let the stars watch over you. Let the water carry you forward slowly, softly, endlessly. You've come a long way. Now sleep.